The river has been running for 1,000 years. It knows the secret. Above it, cut from the same black granite as the cliff itself, an 8-story building rises like a cathedral the world forgot to record. Gothic arches, a water wheel 38 feet across, rusted and tilted wrapped in ivy. No satellite image, no county record, no trace in any database that anyone has ever tried to search. Someone spent 30 years making sure of that. 500 miles south, a man in a bespoke suit slides a manila envelope across a mahogany table and says the words he has been rehearsing for years. He does not look up. He does not need to. He has no idea what he just handed her. On the 22nd day in the dark beneath 3 tons of grinding machinery, her crowbar strikes iron, deep, resonant, impossible, and the river keeps running. Somewhere in upstate New York, above a river that has not stopped running in 1,000 years, there is an 8-story building made of black granite that should not exist. It has Gothic arches, it has crenellations, it has a water wheel 38 feet across that once powered something extraordinary, and a basement sealed so carefully that the air inside stayed dry for 90 years. What was hidden in that basement destroyed one man's empire and gave a 21-year-old woman back everything her family had lost. This is that story. The call came at 4:47 in the morning. Sylvie Rain was standing on a ladder in a condemned tenement in Edinburgh's Old Town, flashlight between her teeth, camera in both hands, carefully photographing a section of 19th century plasterwork that nobody else in the world cared about. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She ignored it again. The third time, she grabbed it without looking, pressed it to her ear, said, "I'm working," before the other person could speak. Pause on the line, then a voice she didn't recognize, flat, professional, careful. "Miss Rain, I'm calling from Holt and Carmichael, attorneys at law in Boston. It's regarding your grandmother, Eleanor Rain." The flashlight dropped, hit the floor with a sharp crack. Sylvie didn't move for a long moment, just stood there on the ladder, in the dark, with the dust of a building she was trying to save floating around her like a slow exhale. She knew, before the woman said another word, she already knew. The flight from Edinburgh to Boston was 9 hours. She spent all 9 of them in the window seat. Didn't sleep, didn't eat the airplane food, just watched the clouds below and thought about the last time she'd spoken to Eleanor 3 weeks ago, Sunday evening, which was strange because Eleanor was not a Sunday evening person. Eleanor was a Tuesday morning person, sharp, efficient, allergic to anything that smelled like sentiment. "How's your work?" Eleanor had asked. "Good," Sylvie had said. "Lots of old things that need saving." A pause, then, "I'm glad you turned out the way you did." That was it. That was the whole conversation. She thought it was odd at the time. Now it felt like a door closing, quietly, without drama, without warning, the way some doors do when they have already made a decision you don't get a vote on. She pressed her forehead against the airplane window, didn't let herself cry. Not yet. Not here. There was a boardroom waiting in Boston, and she needed to be something other than grief-cracked when she walked into it. She needed to be sharp. Rain Infrastructure Group occupied the top 12 floors of a glass tower on Boylston Street that Eleanor had commissioned in 1989, back when glass towers felt like the future, back when the Rain name meant something genuinely earned. The lobby smelled like marble and money. Money that doesn't announce itself. It just is, in the height of the ceilings, in the weight of the doors, in the way the security guard looked at Sylvie's carry-on bag with the expression of a man who had never seen a carry-on bag that messy and was not sure what to do about it. She was still wearing her Edinburgh clothes, jeans, rain-faded jacket, hair pulled back with a pencil she'd forgotten was there. The board members were already seated when she walked in. 12 of them, 12 suits, 12 faces trained to show absolutely nothing, and at the head of the table, Felix, Uncle Felix, which was still the strangest phrase to hold in her mind, because Uncle Felix had shown up to her 7th birthday party and spent the entire time on his phone in the garden, because Uncle Felix sent Christmas cards with his assistant's signature, not his own, because Uncle Felix had always been technically part of the family the way a dentist appointment is technically part of your life, present, unavoidable, producing nothing you'd voluntarily choose. I was 52 years old, bespoke suit, hair that cost more to maintain than most people's car payments. He looked up when she walked in, didn't stand, didn't smile, just looked at her, assessed, dismissed, all in about half a second. "Sylvie," he said, "sit down." Not hello, not I'm sorry about your grandmother, not how was your flight from the other side of the world where you dropped everything to be here. Just sit down. She sat. The lawyers handled most of it, which is what lawyers are for, delivering terrible news in the calmest possible voice, using words like restructuring and majority interest, and voting shares the way doctors use words like malignant and inoperable, technically accurate, emotionally surgical, leaving marks you can't see from the outside. The short version, Eleanor had died on Thursday, will had been read on Friday, and sometime in the years before Friday, Felix had quietly accumulated 63% of Rain Infrastructure's voting shares through a network of 7 holding companies, all of it legal, all of it documented, all of it absolutely airtight. Sylvie had 9%. The board had confirmed the restructuring. Felix was chairman, CEO, the most powerful person in any room he chose to enter, and he sat at the head of that table with the practiced ease of a man who had been planning this for a very long time, which he had. She could see it in the way he wasn't nervous, wasn't uncomfortable, wasn't even slightly bothered by the presence of the granddaughter he'd just displaced, just patient, waiting for this part to be finished so he could get to the next part, the part where she left. "The estate has set aside a severance allocation for you," the lawyer said, slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany. Sylvie looked at it, didn't touch it. "I own 9% of this company," she said. "That's not nothing. 9% of a private corporation," Felix said, "entitles you to nothing beyond what's specified in the operating agreement. Grandmother built this company, and she left it to whoever was best positioned to run it." He tilted his head, patient, reasonable, like she was a student who kept giving the wrong answer on a test with an obvious right answer. "Open the envelope, Sylvie." She opened it. 2 items inside, a cashier's check for $10,000 and a property deed, folded, yellowed at the edges, paper that had been sitting in a file for a very long time, waiting for exactly this moment. She unfolded it. "Ironstone Granary Citadel, 1987, located on the southeastern bank of Grayfall Creek, Seneca County, New York. 4.7 acres. What is this?" "A property," Felix said. "Historical asset, acquired by the estate in 1991. Never developed. He checked his watch. I'm told it's been condemned by the county twice. Nobody's been in it since the 80s as far as anyone's aware. A pause, almost theatrical. You always had a thing for old buildings. Now you have one. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Take the check, he said. Don't do anything dramatic. And then he walked out, and Sylvie sat alone at the long table with a deed to a building she'd never heard of, and $10,000, and 21 years of being arraigned, which apparently added up to exactly this. She looked at the deed. Ironstone Granary Citadel. She sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes before she could make herself move, not crying, not yet. Just sitting in the rental car, hands on the steering wheel, deed on the passenger seat, a hollow feeling she recognized from her parents' divorce, the feeling of something being taken apart, quietly, efficiently, without anyone asking whether she was okay with it. She picked up her phone, typed the property address into Google Maps. The satellite view loaded and then pixelated out. A gray square appeared where the property should have been. Street view unavailable. No satellite image. Just a blank, as if someone had reached into the map and erased a piece of it. That's weird. She tried the Seneca County Property Database. No results. She tried the New York State Historic Preservation Office Registry. Nothing. She searched for Ironstone Granary Citadel directly. 2 results, both dead links, both over 15 years old, one from a local paper called the Grayfall Courier that no longer existed. The headline, County Weighs Options for Landmark Site. No article, no archive, just the headline and then nothing, like the building had been removed from every searchable record. Systematically, deliberately, like someone needed it to not exist. She stared at her phone for a long time. Why would someone erase a building? She started the car, pointed herself north. The drive from Boston to Grayfall should have taken 5 hours. It took 9, because the highway gave way to state routes. The state routes gave way to county roads. The county roads gave way to something that could generously be called a surface you could drive on, but really amounted to a series of muddy suggestions flanked by increasingly dense walls of old-growth trees. Around hour 7, the GPS signal died, not degraded, not spotty, gone, like a switch being thrown. She pulled over at a gas station outside a town called Mill Haven, bought a paper road atlas that smelled like 2003. The woman behind the counter was in her 70s, white hair, apron, an upstate New York face that had been dealing with lost drivers since before the interstate existed. Trying to get to Grayfall, Sylvie said. The woman's hand stopped. Just for a second. Grayfall, she repeated. Yeah, do you know it? Everyone knows it. She picked up a pen, drew a line on the map without asking. Wordless, efficient, then looked up. You related to the Rains? Something cold moved through Sylvie's chest. Why? The woman just looked at her for a moment, then handed back the atlas. Drive careful on that last stretch, she said. Road's bad. The road was bad. The understatement of the decade. The last 12 miles were rutted dirt, washed out in places, overgrown in others. The rental car groaned in ways she was fairly certain weren't covered by the standard insurance agreement. The trees got taller, older, their canopies closed overhead, and the light dropped by degrees until she was driving in something that felt more like dusk than late afternoon. And then the trees opened, and Sylvie's foot found the brake before her brain had quite decided to stop. She sat there with the engine running and looked 8 stories of black granite rising from the edge of a cliff above a rushing river, not just tall, towering, staggering in the way that things are when they absolutely should not exist, but very much do when your mind needs a full second to accept what your eyes are already seeing. The walls were 3 feet thick at the base. She could see where the granite had been quarried from the cliff beneath the building itself. It didn't just stand on the land, it grew out of it, like whoever built this had looked at that specific piece of earth and decided to make the building part of the bedrock itself, as if the whole thing was one continuous act of geological stubbornness. And the architecture was wrong. That was the word her brain kept producing. Not ugly, not ruin, wrong, unexpected. Gothic arches rose 3 stories above the entrance. Long, narrow windows, the kind you see on medieval chapels, ran the full height of the upper floors. The parapet at the roofline had actual crenellations, built to withstand a siege, saying to anyone standing at the end of a rutted road, looking up, I was made to last forever, and I intend to. And attached to the eastern wall, a water wheel, 38 feet in diameter. She knew the measurement immediately because she could see it was roughly level with the 4th floor window ledge, and she was an architect, and architects can't stop measuring things the way other people can't stop picking at a loose thread. The wheel was tilted 20 degrees against the cliff face, several wooden paddles gone, the iron frame oxidized to deep rust red. Ivy colonized the lower half in thick, overlapping waves, but the wheel was there, still structurally present, which for a 38-foot iron wheel above a rushing river, after a century of abandonment, was something close to a miracle. This is not a granary, her first coherent thought. A granary stores grain. A granary is functional, agricultural. It doesn't need Gothic arches. It doesn't need crenellations. It doesn't need 8 stories and 3-foot walls. This was built by someone who wanted permanence, who wanted anyone standing at the end of this particular road to feel something specific when they looked up, and whoever had erased it from every database had done it because anyone who saw this was going to ask a great many questions. She was already asking all of them. She got out of the car. The air tasted different here, cold stone and deep water and something older, underneath both something she didn't have a word for in any language she knew. The river was loud from up on the cliff. It threw white foam against the base with a regularity that sounded almost intentional. She took 3 steps toward the entrance and realized she was not alone. They were standing at the edge of the clearing, 8 of them, maybe 9, not close, not threatening, just standing, watching her with the stillness of people who have been expecting something for a very long time and have reached the point where they can afford to be patient about its arrival. An older man in canvas work clothes, a woman in her 60s still wearing a hardware store apron, 2 teenagers who'd ridden their bikes in and leaned them against a tree to watch, a man in a county parks jacket who had the expression of someone who was technically not supposed to be here but had made a personal decision about that. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Sylvie stood there between the car and the building and felt the full weight of all their attention at once. Then the man in work clothes stepped forward, 65, wide shoulders, white stubble, hands that had spent decades doing physical work and looked every year of it. He looked at her face with the careful attention of someone searching for something familiar, and apparently found it. "You're Eleanor's granddaughter," he said, not a question. "I am. Dean Ashby." He didn't extend his hand, just nodded, like the introduction was a formality Both of them could skip. Structural engineer. I've been filing paperwork on this building for 22 years. Filing for what? Historical designation, preservation orders, state registry. Every single application rejected within 10 days. No formal review, no stated reason. A pause. Your uncle owns the infrastructure company that provides the county with their permit processing software. Has done since 2008. The wind off the river was cold. She hadn't noticed until now. Then a woman stepped out from the group. 58 years old, silver-streaked hair, a practical expression that comes from decades of deciding whether to lend people money. Lorna Moss, the woman said. First Heritage Bank in Gray Fall. I've been waiting for a rain to come back for a very long time. A pause, not in a threatening way. How long, Sylvie said. Since 1991, since Felix's company bought this property and then very specifically did nothing with it. Felix was 19 in 1991. He was 19, Lorna said evenly, and someone was making decisions for him. A pause. Come inside. You need to see it. Then you need to decide if you're staying or leaving, because one of those options means this place gets bulldozed in the next county review cycle. Sylvie looked at the entrance. Heavy oak doors reinforced with iron bands, the Gothic arch above them, the bricked-up windows' outlines still visible like closed eyes, the ivy moving slowly up both sides as if the earth itself was trying to hold the building close. I'm staying, she said. She hadn't decided that until the words were out. But once they were, she meant them completely. The interior was overwhelming. Every other word she tried, vast dramatic ruin, felt like a postcard description of the place, not the actual experience of standing inside it. The main floor was a single cavernous space, 30 feet high, stone walls, a floor of massive granite slabs, cracked and moss-colonized in the gaps but structurally present in a way that nothing here had any business being after 137 years. In the center, the original grinding mechanism, not just a stone, a whole system, 3 massive granite wheels on an iron framework the size of a small house driven by the water wheel outside through a gear train that came through the eastern wall at shoulder height, some gear teeth broken, some drive shafts sheared at the coupling, but the basic structure intact. She stood inside the exposed clockwork of something enormous and felt with the irrational clarity of her training that this could run again. She walked the main floor slowly. Her footsteps echoed with a particular resonance, stone and iron and enclosed air, a room that has been waiting. The upper floors were accessible by a spiral staircase set into the north wall. She went up. Second floor rotted wooden crates, stacked 10 feet high, their contents long since devoured by moisture and time. But the ceiling above her was vaulted stone, each arch still perfectly geometric, each keystone still seated, not shifted by a millimeter. Third floor, more storage, but the windows here were intact, small, Gothic, deeply set into the granite. She looked through one and caught her breath. The view was the river from above, the cliff face dropping away below her, the valley curving north and south in the long afternoon light, old-growth trees, hills going up in layers of autumn color, orange and red, and the last gold of the season, all of it reflected in the water far below. He thought this was an insult. She stood there at a 137-year-old window with the valley spread out below her. He has absolutely no idea what he gave her. She slept in the car that first night. Temperature dropped below freezing around midnight. She wore her Edinburgh rain jacket over her only sweater and wrapped herself in the emergency blanket from the rental car's breakdown kit, and ate crackers and cold canned soup because she'd forgotten to pack anything you could actually heat up. The river was loud all night. It came through the closed windows, persistent, like the building itself, reminding her it was there, reminding her she'd said she was staying. In the morning, she drove into Greyfall, 40 minutes down the valley. Population somewhere around 2,000. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a small bank, a post office, and a county assessor's office, open 3 days a week. Mountains curving around three sides. A town where the buildings are 100 years old, and everyone knows whose car is parked where. She had breakfast at the diner. The woman who served her didn't ask who she was, just brought coffee and said, "Dean Ashby said you'd probably be in this morning," and left it there. Lorna found her before she'd finished the cup. She slid into the booth with the efficiency of a woman who had been managing other people's urgencies for 30 years and had stopped wasting time on preamble. "How much money do you have?" 10,000. Personal savings. 8, maybe 9. I was a graduate student. So about 18, 19,000 total. For what? For whatever you're planning to do. A pause. What are you planning to do? Sylvie looked at her, at this woman she'd known for less than a day, who had apparently been preparing for this conversation for decades. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Then here's what you need to know." Lorna folded her hands on the table. Direct, practical, the way people are when they've been sitting on information for a long time and have finally been given permission to release it. The building has been condemned twice. Current order expires in 8 months. After that, if no substantive work has been done, the county has the right to demolish it at the owner's expense. Felix has been allowing the orders to lapse and reset for 20 years. He's been waiting for the right cycle to push through the demolition permit. Why does he want it demolished? Something careful moved behind Lorna's eyes. That, she said, is the right question. She didn't answer it. Not yet. I can help you access a state historical preservation grant. 15 to 20,000. You need Dean's structural assessment. You need the building to meet minimum stabilization criteria by spring. She paused. It's not enough to restore the building, but it might be enough to save it. Might. Might, Lorna confirmed. These things are always a might. Outside the diner window, Greyfall went about a Tuesday morning, a dog sleeping on the sidewalk, a woman loading lumber into a truck, ordinary and completely disconnected from the particular chaos of Sylvie's week. The building has been erased from every public database, Sylvie said. I know. Who did that? Someone who didn't want it found. Lorna was quiet for a moment. Someone who knew there was something worth hiding. What's worth hiding? I don't know for certain. A long pause. But I've been thinking about it for 22 years, and my best guess is that whatever it is, it's been waiting inside that building, waiting for someone with the right name to come and look. She started clearing the main floor that afternoon. Dean arrived at 8 on Wednesday, walked the foundation for 3 hours with a steel probe and a flashlight, stabbed at mortar, tested load points, climbed things that probably shouldn't have been climbed, said almost nothing the entire time, then came back inside. Old Elias Rain knew what he was doing, he said, wiping stone dust from his hands. Foundation is granite on granite, bedrock. The whole building is essentially one piece of stone. The river hasn't touched the structural core in 137 years. What's the bad news? Upper floor joists, 3 of them are rotted through. He pointed up at the sagging section, visible from below. You get a heavy snow load before those are supported, and the upper 2 floors come down through the middle of the building. How much to stabilize it? With you doing the labor, $25,000 for materials and equipment rental, if you can get the grant. She looked at the roof, at the massive machinery, at the stone walls. I'll get the grant, she said. He looked at her, the way people look at someone who has said something technically improbable that nonetheless, in the way it was said, becomes plausible. All right, he said, and picked up his probe. 3 weeks in, her hands had blisters on top of blisters. Her back hurt in a new specific way that she suspected was going to become a permanent feature of her life. She'd eaten so many canned beans, she had started ranking them by quality, which was a personal low she hadn't anticipated reaching at 21. But the main floor was clear. For the first time in decades, the full square footage was visible. The granite slabs beneath her feet, the gear train emerging from the eastern wall, the grinding wheels in their massive iron frame, the vaulted ceiling above. Every evening, when the light got low and she stopped working, she would stand in the center of the floor and look at all of it, and feel something she could only call impossible hope, that irrational conviction that a thing broken beyond obvious repair might nonetheless, with enough stubborn attention, be made whole. She didn't call Felix, but she thought about him, about the casual cruelty of that envelope, about the way he'd said you always liked old things, as if it were a character defect he was generously tolerating. She thought about the erased records, the rejected preservation applications, the systematic removal of this place from every database that might help someone find it. You don't erase something from the record unless the record shows something you need to hide. On the 17th day, she found the writing, clearing the west wall, working section by section, pulling rotted timber shelving away from the stone, cataloging everything. Standard preservation methodology. You can't fix what you haven't documented. You can't understand what you haven't seen. The shelving came away and left bare granite beneath. She brought her work lamp close to look for structural damage and saw the marks. Not graffiti, not teenage initials, not anything random or casual. Mathematical notation, rendered in careful, precise lines carved directly into the granite with what must have been a chisel and extraordinary patience. Equations she recognized from her engineering coursework, fluid dynamics, hydraulic pressure calculations, head loss formulas, the precise mathematics of water control systems at serious industrial scale. She moved the lamp slowly along the wall. More sections emerged from shadow, a full system design rendered on stone as if the wall itself were a drafting table, pipes and valves and pressure chambers, each component labeled with precise dimension measurements. Each calculation checked and rechecked a second set of figures in a slightly different hand, running parallel to the first, like someone verifying their own work and trusting no one else to do it. At the far left edge of the section, in a different style, smaller, more personal, 2 initials and a date, DR, November 1931. She stepped back. DR, November 1931. She looked at the equations, at the precision, at the sheer amount of care it would take to render hydraulic system diagrams on a stone wall in a condemned building in upstate New York. Who does this? Who comes to a granite building above a river and carves their life's work into the walls? Someone who doesn't trust paper, someone who has watched things taken from them and decided to put the important things somewhere they cannot be removed, someone who is either planning to come back or planning to make absolutely certain that someone else will find this. She photographed every inch of the wall, all 4 panels, 32 feet of equations running from floor to shoulder height, never rushed, never imprecise, the work of months, maybe years. She photographed the initials last, DR. She didn't know who DR was yet, but the equations were here, the precision was here, and the building, the impossible 8-story black granite cathedral that Felix had handed her like a piece of garbage was still standing after 137 years, because whoever built it knew what permanence required. Whatever they'd hidden here, they'd hidden well. And now, for the first time in a very long time, someone with the right name was looking. On the 22nd day, working by flashlight in the section directly beneath the central grinding mechanism, Sylvie's crowbar struck something it shouldn't have. She'd been replacing the rotted floorboards nearest the iron framework. The boards here were soaked through with a century of machinery oil, black, slick, coming away in sections with a sound like tearing fabric. She was in a rhythm. Strike, wedge, pull, discard. Strike, wedge, pull, discard. And then the crowbar hit something and produced a sound she had never heard before. Sharp, clear, resonant, metallic in a way that was completely different from the iron framework above her head. A sound that means mass, density, something designed to be there. She stopped, got the flashlight down into the gap between the floor joists, and saw it, set directly into the bedrock, below the foundation, below any level that the county blueprints or the historical records or Dean Ashby's 22 years of paperwork had ever acknowledged existed. An iron hatch, heavy, riveted, sealed at the edges with lead and pitch, a wheel mechanism at the center seized with rust, the color of old blood, and across the wheel a lock, not a padlock, something larger, industrial, hardware that says, what is inside here matters, hardware that says, I made this decision deliberately, and I want you to know that getting past it will require effort. Hardware that says what I put here was worth protecting. Sylvie sat back on her heels, heart going fast, hands completely still. She'd been finding pieces of this building's secret for 22 days, in erased databases and equations on walls, and a banker who had been quietly waiting for decades for someone to come back and ask the right questions. And here it was, right under her feet, directly beneath 3 tons of grinding machinery, in a building successfully removed from every public record for 30 years, in a location where no casual inspection would ever look, where no county assessor's report would ever notice, where the weight of the machinery above had effectively buried the hatch in plain sight for nearly a century. She looked at the lock, looked at her angle grinder sitting 6 feet away on the cleared floor, looked at the lock again. Dorothea, she thought, what did you put down here? She plugged in the grinder. Sparks erupted in the dark space beneath the floorboards, gold and white, filling the shadows with sudden fractured light, and the sound of metal on metal filled the stone cathedral above her, and the river roared on outside, as if it had been waiting too, as if everything in this valley had been waiting for exactly this particular girl, in exactly this particular moment, with her Edinburgh clothes and her blistered hands and her 9% of a company that meant nothing, and everything in the world that was about to mean everything. The lock fought her for 23 minutes, she counted, because the counting gave her something to do with the part of her brain that wanted to spiral into the enormous implications of what she was doing, crouching beneath the central machinery of a condemned building she'd owned for less than a month, in the dark, cutting through hardware she had no legal right to destroy, on property that a very powerful and well-lawyered man was planning to demolish. This is either the best decision you've ever made, she thought, or it is very, very much not that. The lock snapped on the 23rd minute, a clean break, high pitch, final. The two halves fell separately into the dark below and made no sound when they landed, which meant the space beneath the hatch was deeper than she'd expected. She grabbed the wheel mechanism, pulled. It didn't move. She repositioned, put her boots against the floor, joists on either side of the hatch, gripped the wheel with both hands and used every muscle in her lower back that she was going to regret tomorrow. The wheel turned 1 inch, screaming, reluctant, as if it had been sealed so long it had forgotten it was ever meant to move. Then another inch, then it gave, spinning free, 3 full rotations before it stopped. She grabbed the iron handle and lifted, and the hatch came up on counterweighted hinges, exactly the way a bank vault door comes up, heavy, precise, inevitable. Cold air rose from the opening. She sat back, breathed it in, because it was wrong, not damp, not mildewed, not the dark ancient rot she'd been expecting. It was dry, peculiarly, impossibly dry, and it carried something under the dryness, something layered and quiet. Old paper, linseed oil, and something else she'd smelled before, but took a moment to place. Mahogany, the scent of fine furniture kept in a closed room for a very long time. She brought the flashlight to the opening, a stone staircase, spiral, carved directly into the bedrock, descending further than the beam could reach. She went down. The room at the bottom was not what she was expecting, which by this point she should have expected, because nothing in this building was what she expected. Not the Gothic arches, not the equations on the wall, not the 38-foot iron water wheel she was starting to think might actually be salvageable. And not this, not this. The space was roughly 40 feet by 20, cut from solid rock, the walls coated in a dark pitch compound that had over 90 years done exactly what it was designed to do, kept the moisture out completely. The floor was poured concrete, smooth and level. The ceiling was steel I-beams, 8 of them spanning the width of the room. The retrofit looked like the 1920s, maybe early 1930s, and along the far wall, she found a ceramic switch. She stood there looking at it for a moment. The part of her brain with a degree in conservation architecture said, this is a separate circuit, independent, tied to a small turbine generator, driven by the water wheel above, completely off-grid, installed before the main building's electrical system, and probably designed to outlast it. The other part of her brain said there is no way that still works. She flipped the switch. 3 industrial incandescent bulbs, caged in iron spaced evenly across the ceiling, flickered, buzzed, then flooded the room with warm amber light. She stood completely still in the middle of that light. This was a workspace. That was the first and most important thing. Not a storage room, not a hiding place, a workspace. A professional, deliberate, carefully equipped workspace that someone had gone to extraordinary effort to carve from the bedrock of a cliff above a river in 1931 and had somehow managed to keep operational for 90 years. Along the left wall, iron shelves, still loaded, stacks of papers wrapped in oilskin, their edges dusty but not rotted, drafting instruments in a leather roll compass, dividers, protractor, the precision equipment you don't buy unless precision is your actual job, a draftsman's table against the center left wall, the surface still perfectly flat under a coat of fine stone dust. Books, 20, maybe 30, standing upright in iron brackets, technical volumes, engineering texts in English and French. She read the spines, hydraulics, fluid mechanics, civil engineering standards, 1920 to 1935, and tucked between two reference volumes, a slim personal journal, brown leather, a single brass clasp. On the right wall, iron racks, floor to ceiling, deep and loaded with crates. She walked toward them slowly. The crates were branded in faded black stencil, Old Raven Distillery, bottled in bond, 1928, Hawthorne Reserve, single malt rye, 1925, Cumberland Creek, pre-prohibition blend, 1924, 40 crates, maybe more. She started counting and stopped herself at 37 because she needed to keep moving. The amber liquid visible through the crack of one partially open lid was perfectly clear, undisturbed, the wax seals on every bottle unbroken. Pre-prohibition whiskey, 100-year-old bottles, perfectly preserved in absolute darkness at a stable subterranean temperature. She understood what she was looking at. A single bottle of this pedigree at the right auction house would draw serious collectors, serious money, 40 crates of it. Okay, she thought. Okay, that's actually okay. But that wasn't the thing. That wasn't the core of it. She could feel that already. The whiskey was fuel. It was practical. It was the discovery that solves your immediate problem and lets you get to the actual problem. The actual problem was in the center of the room. The safe was a Mosler. She recognized it immediately. 6th month module on industrial heritage preservation. The Musler Safe Company made the heavy iron bank vaults that survived the Hiroshima blast. Equipment built under the assumption that the world might end, and these specific things should make it through. It was enormous, bolted to the concrete floor with anchor points the size of her fist. Iron, dark, cold-looking even in the amber light. The door was open, not wide, not flung back in the way of someone who'd found something and been overwhelmed, just cracked, a few inches, deliberately, as if whoever left it open had wanted whoever came next to find it without difficulty, as if they had planned for someone to come. Sylvie pulled the door wide. The first thing she saw was the bourbon, not the whiskey from the racks. Something else. A single bottle set upright on the central shelf of the safe in a small iron cradle. Different label. Dorothea's Reserve, 1929. Private batch. No distillery name, just the name and the year. Made by hand, made for herself. The second thing she saw was the box. Mahogany, velvet lined, 8 inches by 12. The source of that scent she'd caught at the top of the stairs. She lifted the lid. Corporate bearer bonds. Bearer shares in 7 private companies. Dated 1929 through 1935. The face values were significant, even before 90 years of interest calculations. The paper was dry and intact. The signatures were clear. The third thing she saw was what mattered. A stack of documents in protective oil paper wrapping, tied with linen tape. She undid the tape carefully, unfolded the wrapping. Patent certificates. United States Patent Office. 4 of them, dated 1929, 1931, 1933, and 1934, all 4 bearing the same inventor's name, Dorothea Elspeth Rain. Sylvie stood in the amber light, looking at the name, her own name, her grandmother Eleanor's name, her great-grandmother's name, a name she had never heard once in 21 years of being a Rain. She took the journal from the bookshelf. She brought it to the draftsman's table, sat on the stone stool that was still positioned there, as if someone had just stepped away. She undid the brass clasp. The handwriting was meticulous, black ink, an engineer's precision even in personal notation. Measurements, exact dates, specific, nothing assumed. She started at the first page. January 3rd, 1926. First successful test of the pressure attenuation valve at the creek. Flow reduction 74% at peak. Flooding in the lower field prevented entirely. Grandfather Elias would have understood why this matters. I think he would have been proud. She turned pages. The journal was half technical record, half private testimony. Equations interspersed with observations. The voice of someone who understood that the work and the life were the same thing and had stopped pretending otherwise. March 1928. Filed preliminary patent applications through the Boston office. Clarence reviewed the documentation, said the system needed further testing before going to press. I have tested it 16 times. I know it works. He knows it works. Something is shifting in his posture when he looks at the drawings. September 1929. The applications have been approved. The patents are in my name. Clarence has stopped asking to review the work. November 1930. The county approached Clarence directly about licensing the flood control system for the River Basin project. He accepted. He signed the agreement. My name appears nowhere in the documentation. I asked him about it after dinner. He said my name on a licensing contract would complicate the commercial relationship. He said it while looking at the window. Not at me. December 1930. I understand what is happening now. I have understood for several months. I have been waiting to be wrong. I am not wrong. I am copying every patent, every calculation, every signed agreement. I am putting them in a place Clarence will never look, because Clarence has always believed this building is a liability. He thinks I come here for sentiment, for the memory of my grandfather. He has no idea. February 1934. The company is established, Rain Infrastructure Group. Clarence's name on the articles of incorporation. My patents transferred to the company under a document I never signed. The attorney said I couldn't contest it. The judge agreed with the attorney. Clarence has friends in the right places. I am not defeated. I want to say that clearly to whoever reads this, because someone will read this. I am certain of that. I am putting the originals here, in the bedrock, in the building my grandfather made from granite and intention. Clarence can take the name on the paper. He cannot take this. He cannot reach what he cannot find. No courtroom in 1934 will protect a woman's work from her husband. I have asked enough lawyers to know the answer before I finish the question, but the world does not stay the way it is. Someday someone will read this. I hope they have more tools than I did. Do not be afraid of him, whatever shape he takes when you find this. Do not be afraid. The truth has been waiting here for a very long time, and it does not expire. Dorothea Elspeth Rain, November 14th, 1934. Sylvie put the journal down. Press both hands flat on the draftsman's table. The amber light, the dry air, the sound of the river muffled by 30 feet of solid rock. She thought about Dorothea coming down here in 1934 by herself, putting the patents and the bonds and the bourbon, that single private batch, her own name on the label, into the Mosler safe, leaving the door open just enough because she trusted that someone would come 90 years later, and the person who came was 21 years old and covered in construction dust and had eaten beans out of a can for 3 weeks. Well, Sylvie thought, with a feeling that sat somewhere between grief and gratitude. Here I am. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the subterranean room until the warmth of her body had taken the edge off the cold air, reading, working through every document in the safe, making notes in her own notebook, cross-referencing the patents with the technical drawings on the walls above. By 3 in the morning, she understood the full picture. Rain Infrastructure Group was currently the primary contractor for flood control and hydraulic regulation systems in 14 states along the eastern seaboard. Every contract, every licensing agreement, every infrastructure bid, all of it built on a portfolio of foundational patents, patents that originated in the notebooks of a woman who had been removed from the record so completely that her own granddaughter had grown up not knowing her name. The annual licensing revenue alone ran into hundreds of millions, the back royalties calculated at standard rates for 90 years of undisclosed use of intellectual property. She got out her phone and did the math 3 times because the number kept coming back wrong. It kept coming back wrong because it was very, very large. Felix, she thought, you gave me the key to your own front door. She looked at the patents again, looked at Dorothea's name on each one, clean and clear and absolutely legally definitive. Then she picked up her phone and texted Lorna Moss at 3:17 in the morning. I need to talk to you first thing. I found something. The reply came back in under 4 minutes. I've been awake. Come to the bank at 7. I'll have coffee. She told them both everything. Lorna and Dean, across the small table in Lorna's office, with the Venetian blinds closed and the door locked, spread the patents on the table, the bonds, Dorothea's journal open to the last entry. Dean read the final entry twice, didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked, had been held in careful neutral for 22 years, had loosened. I found the ventilation shaft to that room in 2003, he said quietly. I didn't know what I was looking at. I thought it was a historical drainage system. You never went in. The hatch was locked. A pause. I should have been more curious. You weren't supposed to find it, Sylvie said. It was waiting for someone specific. Lorna was looking at the patents with the focused attention of a woman who had been reading financial documents for 30 years and understood exactly what she was seeing. The patents are still legally valid. The first one expires in 2029. 3 are perpetual process patents with renewable status. Lorna looked up. Does Felix know these exist? No one knows these exist. They're not in any RAIN infrastructure filing. They're not in any IP registry under the company name because they were never formally transferred. The transfer document Clarence used was forged. I found Dorothea's notes on the meeting with her attorney. She paused. A forged transfer 90 years ago doesn't extinguish the original patent holder's estate rights, especially when the original documents have been preserved intact. Silence in the small office. The sound of gray fall going about its Wednesday morning outside the closed blinds. We need a lawyer, Lorna said. We need a shark.
My brother-in-law, Lorna said slowly, senior partner in Manhattan. He handles corporate intellectual property litigation for companies that can actually afford him. A pause. He owes me a favor from 1997 that he has been hoping I would forget. I have not forgotten. Call him, Sylvie said. The bourbon sold in 41 days. A private auction house in London that Lorna's bank had a relationship with through a chain of 3 intermediaries that ensured nothing traceable connected the seller to a rain or a gray fall or a condemned building in upstate New York. 37 crates, each bottle assessed, cataloged, authenticated. The pre-prohibition provenance was exceptional. The condition was, according to the auction house's specialist, the single best preserved private cash she had seen in a 30-year career. The final hammer price, $6.4 million. Sylvie was standing in the Grayfall diner, eating scrambled eggs when Lorna called with the number. She put the fork down, picked it up again, put it down again. Say that number one more time. Lorna said it. Okay, Sylvie said. Okay. She ate the rest of the eggs in thoughtful silence, then drove back to the Citadel, stood in the main floor beneath the grinding wheels, and looked up at the vaulted ceiling, at the Gothic arches, at the first streaks of new plaster, where Dean had begun the stabilization work. Elias, she said to the empty building, your granddaughter was extraordinary, and someone in this family is going to make sure the world knows it. The river answered, out through the eastern wall, low and constant, and she was becoming increasingly convinced, deliberately encouraging. Magnus Pierce arrived 3 weeks later. I was 60 years old, conservative suit, compact briefcase, the manner of a man who had spent 4 decades winning wars that other people had started. He read the patents, the journal Dorothea's documentation, and the Rain infrastructure filings with the same expression he probably used for everything: focus, neutral, professionally unimpressed. Then he looked up. The forged transfer document is almost certainly traceable, he said. Paper analysis will date it precisely. The signature on the alleged consent form doesn't match Dorothea's handwriting in the journal. Handwriting analysis will confirm. And the patents themselves. Originals in this condition, combined with prior art documentation in the form of these wall carvings. He glanced toward the staircase leading up to the main floor, and a contemporaneous private journal. It's close to airtight. A pause. 90 years of unpaid licensing fees, calculated at standard industry rates, would exceed the company's current market capitalization, which means Felix Rain's company is technically insolvent the moment I file the injunction. She looked at him. He looked back. But you don't want to just bankrupt the company, he said. Not a question. He'd done this long enough to read what people needed before they found the words for it. I want to take it back, she said. The whole thing. Everything Clarence stole from Dorothea and everything Felix has been hoarding since. I want Rain infrastructure rebuilt on the truth instead of the lie. A pause. Can you do that? Magnus Pierce picked up his pen. I can do considerably better than that, he said. The holding company was called Ironstone Capital, registered anonymously in Delaware, capitalized with a portion of the auction proceeds, managed through a layer of legal infrastructure that Magnus had apparently been building in his spare time for 3 decades, specifically for situations like this. The plan by Felix's debt. Felix had been aggressively over-leveraging Rain infrastructure for years, expanding contracts, modernizing infrastructure, taking large loans from a network of institutional lenders. Smart moves technically, the kind of expansion that looks brilliant until the moment it doesn't. What Felix did not know, the lenders were selling his promissory notes on the secondary market. Standard practice, institutional debt moves, it's in the fine print. Everybody knows it happens. Almost nobody tracks it. Ironstone Capital began buying. Through proxies, through intermediaries, small purchases at first, under the radar, activity that looks like routine portfolio diversification to anyone not specifically watching. Felix was not watching. Felix was in Boston announcing a new contract with the state of North Carolina and getting his photograph taken outside a building with his name on it, and Sylvie was in the basement of a granite fortress above a river, reading Dorothea's technical notebooks, understanding page by page exactly how the hydraulic system she'd invented actually worked, because she was an architect, because she had a conservation degree and a mind wired for structural systems, because she wanted to know, not just legally own, what Dorothea had spent her life building. By early spring, Ironstone Capital held 38% of Rain Infrastructure's outstanding debt. Then it stopped. On a Tuesday morning in March, Sylvie woke up to a notification on her phone. Wire transfer failed. She picked up the phone, tried again, failed, called Magnus. "What's happening?" "Emergency injunction," he said, without preamble, the voice of someone who had already been up for 2 hours dealing with it. "Filed yesterday afternoon in Delaware. Your accounts have been frozen pending a hearing." Her stomach dropped. Felix. Not Felix directly. His attorneys. They flagged a pattern of suspicious debt acquisition targeting Rain Infrastructure assets. They don't know it's you. They don't have your name, but they found the pattern and they moved fast. How long? The hearing is in 11 days. Can you win? A pause, the silence of a man calculating the honest answer against the comforting one. "Yes," he said, "but I need 11 days. She put the phone down, sat on the edge of the cot she'd installed in the building's one habitable room. Early March, cold light through the restored third-floor window, the sound of the river below. 11 days of being completely unable to move. 11 days of Felix's lawyers working while hers worked back. 11 days of not knowing. She cleaned. What else was there to do? She cleaned and she restored and she worked 12-hour days with her hands while her brain went in circles. The debt purchases were frozen, but nothing had been reversed yet. The patents were untouched. The legal case was intact. Magnus was in a Delaware courtroom doing things she didn't fully understand with extraordinary focus, and she was in a basement reading. She went back to Dorothea's notebooks, not just the journal, the technical ones, all 6 of them, cover to cover, the equations and the system designs and the testing notes and the failure analyses, the record of a mind working through a complex engineering problem over 10 years with patience and rigor and an absolute refusal to cut corners. The hydraulic attenuation system, the way it managed peak flow without hard blocking, the pressure relief design that prevented the structural damage that traditional flood control caused, the elegance of it, because it was elegant. That was the word, not just functional, elegant. The solution that uses the minimum number of moving parts to accomplish the maximum result. The design that once you understand it, makes you incapable of going back to thinking it couldn't have been done. I keep coming back to the pressure chamber configuration Dorothea had written in the third notebook. Everyone else in this field is trying to block the water. I keep thinking, what if you talk to it instead? What if you design the system to accommodate the force rather than resist it? You can't beat a river in an argument, but you can redirect the conversation. Sylvie read that paragraph 4 times, then sat for a while, thinking about women who had been told no so many times they'd found ways to accomplish things without needing anyone's yes. Thinking about Eleanor, who had grown up as Dorothea's daughter and never known who her mother really was. What it must have felt like to read the final journal entry for the first time, to understand in her 80s that the woman she'd barely known had been extraordinary in a way the world had worked very hard to erase. She thought about the letter. In the safe, under the patents. Eleanor's handwriting, not Dorothea's. She hadn't opened it yet. She didn't know why. Every time she reached for it, something stopped her. The sense that it was the last sealed thing, that once she opened it, the full shape of what had happened across 4 generations would be complete, and she would have to act accordingly. On day 8 of the 11 days, she made herself open it. The letter was 4 pages. Eleanor's handwriting, strong even at 85, penmanship drilled in school and maintained by long habit. My darling girl, I am writing this in the summer of 2022. I have been coming to Greyfall for 3 years now, quietly, without telling anyone. I found the hatch by accident, the same way I imagine you did, following something that didn't quite make sense, a sound, an inconsistency in the floor plan, the particular instinct for structural wrongness that it seems our family carries. I found my mother's room. I read everything she left here. I sat at her draftsman's table and understood for the first time in my 87 years who she actually was. And I thought about all the Sunday dinners and the photographs on mantles and the company anniversary programs and my mother's name absent from every single one of them, and I understood what had been done to her, and I sat in this room alone and cried for a long time because it was too late for me to have known her differently, too late to have asked her to her face. I thought about fighting it myself. I had lawyers who would have tried, but I am old and I am tired and the courts move slowly and Felix has his people in places that slow them further. I would die in litigation before seeing the end of it. I know this. I am not being pessimistic. I am being precise. But you are 19 years old. You have a degree in how to preserve what was worth keeping. You have your mother's stubbornness and your grandfather's patience and something entirely your own that I recognized the first time you were put in my arms. There is one thing Felix will do when I am gone. One thing I am completely certain of. He will underestimate the inheritance he gives you. He will think he is handing you a ruin. He doesn't know about the room. He doesn't know about the patents. He doesn't know about any of it. I made absolutely certain of that. Go to Greyfall. Go to the building. Do what the women in this family were always told they couldn't do. Take it back. All my love, always. Eleanor. Sylvie sat with the letter in her hands. In the room Dorothea had built from the bedrock of a cliff. In the building Elias had raised from the stone of the land itself. 4 generations. 3 women and an old man with extraordinary ideas about permanence. Same stubbornness. Same refusal to let the important things disappear. She planned this, Sylvie thought. Eleanor planned the whole thing. She made sure Felix would give me this building. She made sure I would find it. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathed, didn't let herself fall apart, because there would be time for falling apart later, and right now the clock said day 8, and Magnus needed 3 more days, and she still had work to do. Day 11, 6:42 in the morning. Her phone rang. "We won," Magnus said. No preamble, just those 2 words.
She was standing in the main floor with a cup of coffee, early light coming through the third-floor windows at an angle that caught the new plaster and the restored ironwork and made the whole central space look exactly as extraordinary as it actually was. She exhaled, long, slow, all the air she'd been holding for 11 days. "The injunction is dissolved," Magnus continued, "accounts unfrozen as of 30 minutes ago, and the pattern of purchases has been officially reviewed and classified as legitimate secondary market activity, which means we can resume immediately." "How long to complete the position?" 3 weeks, maybe 4. We're at 38%. We need 65 to have controlling debt position. A pause, and I filed the patent infringement notice this morning. Rain Infrastructure's legal team has received formal notification. They have 30 days to respond. Felix will know someone is coming. He will know something is coming. He will not know what or from where. Another pause. "How are you holding up?" She looked at the room, at the grinding wheels, at the light, at the staircase that led down to Dorothea's room, where 6 notebooks still sat on iron shelves and where the Mosler safe stood open with its door deliberate and exact. "I'm holding up fine," she said, and meant it, because she had Dorothea's voice in the notebooks. She had Eleanor's letter pressed flat between the pages of her own. She had a building full of light in the morning and a river that had been talking to her for 2 months and a structural engineer and a banker who had been waiting for her arrival for longer than she'd been alive. She had the patents, she had the bonds, she had 38% of Felix's corporate debt and climbing. And she had something else, something that didn't have a financial value but mattered anyway. She understood, sitting in Dorothea's room on day 8 reading about pressure, attenuation, and the wisdom of redirecting force instead of resisting it, that she didn't want to destroy Felix. She wanted to redirect him out of the building, out of the company, out of the legacy he'd camped on, like a man who had found someone else's house empty and decided it was his. She wanted what Dorothea had wanted, not to win the argument, to change the facts on the ground until the argument was no longer necessary, to accomplish something without needing anyone's yes. 3 more weeks, 4 at most, and then she was going to Boston. 4 weeks. That was all it took. 4 weeks of ironstone capital moving through the secondary debt market, like water finding the lowest point in a landscape. Quiet, inevitable, unhurried. Week 1, 38% to 44%. Week 2, 44% to 51%. Week 3, 51% to 58%. Week 4, 58% to 67%. Sylvie was on the roof of the Citadel when Magnus called with the final number, 67%, sitting up there with Dean's old thermos of coffee, looking out across the valley in the early April light, the river below catching the sun in small, violent flashes, the hills going green again after a long winter, the whole valley breathing out the way valleys do when they've decided spring is finally serious. "It's done," Magnus said. 2 words. She held the phone against her chest for a moment, felt the cold through her jacket, felt the granite beneath her hands, felt somewhere below both the weight of 4 generations. "File the injunction," she said. "Already filed. This morning.
Rain infrastructure has 30 days to respond. She looked out at the valley, thought about Dorothea, down in that room, 1934, carving equations into the walls, sealing the safe, recording her voice into a steel wire machine with the patient fury of a woman who understood that the present had failed her and was betting everything on the future. I hope they have more tools than I did. They're going to come after the building, Sylvie said. Yes. How fast? Faster than you'd like. A pause. Felix has had the demolition papers ready since 2019. All he needed was a reason to file them. The patent injunction is that reason. He'll use the building as leverage, force a negotiation instead of a courtroom. He still doesn't know it's me. He knows someone is coming for him. He's going to burn everything he can't negotiate with. Magnus's voice was even, precise. Prepare for the notice. She put the phone in her pocket, looked down at the iron water wheel on the east face of the building. They'd been working on it for 3 weeks. Dean had sourced replacement timber for 7 of the missing paddles from an old-growth mill in Vermont. The new wood was pale against the dark iron frame. She could see it clearly from up here. The wheel was still tilted, still resting against the cliff face at that 20-degree angle, but it was almost whole again. Almost, she thought. Everything is almost. The demolition notice arrived on a Thursday, not by mail, not through a county office, directly to the Citadel, hand-delivered by a man in a county infrastructure vest who knocked on the front door with the expression of someone who had been told this was a routine administrative matter and had clearly figured out on the drive over that it was not. 96 hours, emergency structural safety violation, authorized by the Seneca County Building Authority, citing 3 prior condemnation orders, citing risk to public safety from the deteriorated water wheel mechanism and unstable upper floor joists. The upper floor joist that Dean had stabilized in February, the water wheel they were in the process of restoring. Both claims false, both claims filed by a county authority whose permit processing software was owned by a company Felix Rain controlled. Sylvie read the notice twice, standing in the doorway, the man in the county vest not quite meeting her eyes. Is there anything you'd like to say on record? He asked. She looked at him. I'd like to say on record, she said carefully, that this building is in the process of active restoration, that a licensed structural engineer has signed off on its safety, and that I will be contesting every word of this notice. He wrote something down, nodded, left. She closed the door, stood in the main floor, the grinding wheels above her, the spring light through the 3rd floor windows, the new plaster catching it clean. 96 hours. She called Lorna. I know, Lorna said before Sylvie could speak. I heard. How did you hear already? This town has about 2,000 people, sweetheart. He filed the notice 11 minutes ago. I've already had 4 phone calls. What do we do? I've already put something in motion, Lorna said. Her voice had a quality Sylvie hadn't heard in it before, something quiet and absolute, the voice of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment for 22 years and was not remotely surprised to find herself ready. Come to the bank. Bring Dean. By noon, there were 40 people in the clearing. By 3 o'clock, there were 90. They came from Greyfall and from the 2 neighboring towns and from a farm 12 miles up the valley that a woman had been running alone since her husband died and who had apparently decided that this was worth the drive. They came with camp chairs and thermoses and in one memorable case, a Dutch oven full of chili that a retired school teacher named Arlene had made at 5 in the morning because she said she'd known this day was coming, and you couldn't protect a building on an empty stomach. No violence, no confrontation, just presence. Lorna had called the Syracuse newspaper. The newspaper had called a TV affiliate. A news van was parked at the end of the rutted road by 2 o'clock with a reporter who had taken one look at the 8-story Gothic granite fortress rising from the cliff above the river and immediately called her editor to say this was a much better story than she'd been told it was. Dean walked the building's perimeter with his structural assessment in a binder, offering it to anyone who asked. The documentation was complete, clean, unambiguous. The building met every safety standard. The joists were stabilized. The water wheel posed no structural risk. The county notice was fiction, and Dean had 80 pages of evidence confirming exactly that. Magnus was on the phone with 3 different legal offices simultaneously. The emergency injunction against the demolition notice was filed by 4 o'clock, something close to a record, even for him. Sylvie stood in the main floor and looked at all of it through the open front doors. 40 people, then 90. By late afternoon, she had stopped counting because the number kept going up. People she didn't know, people who owed her nothing, people who had watched this building for years from a careful distance and had apparently just been waiting to be given a reason. Eleanor, she thought, did you know this would happen too? Lorna appeared at her shoulder. He miscalculated, Lorna said quietly. He didn't think about the town. He never thinks about the town. A pause. People like Felix never do. They think about assets and liabilities and leverage points. They forget that some things have value that doesn't appear on a balance sheet. Outside, Arlene was serving chili in paper cups to the TV reporter. Something, Sylvie thought. On the second night of the vigil, she went back down. She'd been meaning to go back for a week, since finishing Dorothea's 6th notebook, since reading every piece of documentation in the safe, since satisfying herself as thoroughly as an architectural conservator and an IP attorney combined could satisfy themselves that she had found everything, except she hadn't, because she'd missed the crate. It was in the far right corner of the room, half hidden behind the last iron rack, a wooden crate smaller than the whiskey ones. No distillery mark, just a single initial burned into the lid with a soldering iron. She'd noticed it before, registered it as probably another whiskey variant, hadn't opened it because she'd been focused on the safe and the journals and the patents. She opened it now. The packing inside was dry straw, the same as the whiskey crates, but what the straw cradled was not a bottle. It was a machine, roughly the size of a large hat box, iron and steel construction, a drive mechanism with 2 spools, one empty and one loaded with a fine coil of dark wire, a set of electromagnetic heads positioned between the spools with the precision of something custom-built, a hand-cranked power input on the side, and below it in a separate padded compartment, a copper-wound transducer, essentially a small speaker connected to the main unit by a short cable. She sat very still in the amber light. She knew what this was. Marconi steel wire recorder, early 1930s, used primarily in professional broadcasts and radio archiving. The steel wire was brittle with age, but steel wire, unlike wax or magnetic tape, is essentially chemically inert. In a room this dry, this cold, this perfectly sealed. 90 years, she thought. Is that possible? She brought Dean down. He looked at it for a long time without speaking, turned it carefully in the light, examined the wire on the supply spool, tested the drive mechanism, located the coupling that connected the hand crank to the motor assembly. I need to rig a separate power source, he said. The internal motor capacitors are probably gone, but the electromagnetic heads look intact. If I bypass the motor and drive it externally at the correct speed, how long? All night. He looked at her. Maybe. All night, she said. She went back upstairs, sat with the people keeping the vigil, drank Arlene's coffee, which was very strong and tasted like it had been made by someone with strong opinions about what coffee was supposed to accomplish, watched the firelight moving across the granite walls outside, listened to the river, couldn't sleep, went back down at 3 a.m. Dean was still at it, an array of equipment spread across the draftsman's table, his oscilloscope a small modern battery-powered unit connected to the recorder's output via a series of resistors and a small amplifier he'd apparently built from components in a kit he kept in his truck, which told her something about Dean Ashby that she filed away and felt grateful for. Almost, he said, he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the oscilloscope display. Wire speed is the problem. Still machines ran at roughly 15 inches per second. I need to match that precisely or the pitch distorts. A pause. I think I have it. He made one final adjustment, looked at the display, nodded once. Ready, he asked. Yes, she said, and then not yes, not quite. Wait, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. And what if no? Yes, she said again. Dean engaged the external drive motor. The steel wire began to move. A low, rushing sound, the artifact of old wire crossing electromagnetic heads. Static, silence, more static. Then a tone, a single steady tone, the kind of calibration signal used by broadcast engineers to mark the beginning of a recording. And then a voice, female, clear, precise, the particular diction of a well-educated woman in 1934 when educated women spoke in paragraphs and did not waste syllables, 90 years old and impossibly present. This is Dorothea Elspeth Rain. It is the 14th of November, 1934. I am speaking into a Marconi steel recording machine in the basement workshop of Ironstone Granary, Citadel, Seneca County, New York. Pause. I want the record to be precise. I have always believed in precision. Sylvie sat on the stone floor. She did not do this consciously. Her legs simply went, and she sat down, and the cold of the concrete came up through her jeans, and she did not feel it. Dean sat down too. They listened. Dorothea's voice filled the room she had built. Her room, her bedrock, her lights still amber overhead, her equations still on the walls, her draftsman's table still at the center of the space, and her voice, not telling the whole story again, not reciting dates and names and legal proceedings, just present, just human, just a woman who had spent her life thinking about how water moves through the world and had now decided to leave one final message in the most permanent medium she could find. I want to state clearly that I do not believe myself to be defeated. Clarence has taken what can be taken, paper, names, legal fictions. He has taken the infrastructure of the thing I built. But infrastructure is not the same as the thing itself. Pause. The thing itself is in this room. It will remain in this room because I have sealed this room and I have put it in the care of the building that my grandfather made from granite and intention in 1887. And this building will outlast every lie
that has been told in the last 3 years. I am certain of that. I am certain of almost nothing else right now, but I am certain of that. Her voice shifted just slightly. I am also speaking to whoever finds this, because someone will find this. I know that the way I know the pressure, attenuation calculations I've been running for a decade, not by feeling, by logic. The truth wants to be found. It is structurally inclined toward the surface, and someone with the right name will come to this building, because people with the right name always eventually come home. A longer pause now. I want to say something to that person. Sylvie pressed her hands flat on the cold floor. Don't be afraid. Whatever he looks like when you find this, whatever shape the obstruction takes, don't be afraid of it, because fear is the only thing that actually works in his favor. Fear and silence, he's counting on both. Pause. And also, thank you. Just that. Thank you for coming. Thank you for getting this far. Thank you for being stubborn enough. Whoever you are, whatever it cost you to get here. A final pause. The truth doesn't expire. It just waits. I've given it a very good place to wait. End. The wire continued running for a few seconds after the recording finished. The static faded. The drive motor hummed alone in the silence. Sylvie did not move for a very long time. Dean turned off the motor. The room held the silence of a space that has just been asked to carry something enormous and has decided quietly that it can. She thought about Dorothea sitting exactly here, with this machine, in this room, in 1934, recording herself with the precision of a woman who had decided that if the present wouldn't protect her, then she would speak directly to the future and ask it to do better. She thought about Eleanor, reading these journals in 2019, understanding at 84 what her mother had been, what had been done to her, what she had left behind, and why. She thought about herself, 21 years old, Edinburgh clothes, blistered hands, sitting on the floor of a room that had been waiting 90 years for someone to sit in it and feel the full weight of what happened here. Thank you for coming. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment, held it there. Dean didn't say anything, because Dean was a man who understood that some things don't need a response. They just need to be witnessed. She breathed once, twice, 3 times, then looked up. I need you to make me a copy of that recording, she said. Her voice came out completely steady, because some things are so large that the only way to hold them is to be very, very still. The demolition notice died on day 3. Magnus's emergency injunction was upheld by a judge in Syracuse who had reviewed Dean's structural assessment and the county filing, and then called the county attorney's office and asked in the measured tone of a judge who has been doing this for 30 years what exactly was going on. The answer to that question was going to occupy several additional legal proceedings, but for now, the notice was dead. The building stood. The people in the clearing drank the last of Arlene's chili and went home. Lorna found Sylvie standing in the main floor that evening. Next step, Lorna said. Boston. When? Sylvie looked up at the grinding wheels, at the vaulted ceiling, at the new plaster and the restored ironwork, and the early evening light coming through the Gothic windows in long amber bars. The annual shareholder meeting is in 8 days, she said. Magnus says we timed the full filing for that morning. The debt position announced at the same time as the patent injunction, so Felix can't process one before the other arrives. He's going to be standing in that room thinking he's giving a speech. Yes, Lorna looked at her. And you're going to walk through the door. Sylvie turned. I'm going to walk through the door.
she said. She bought a suit, not expensive, not performatively expensive anyway, but the right cut, charcoal gray, clean lines, the kind of thing that says, I have been working for 6 months and I am here on purpose. She drove to Boston alone. No Magnus in the car with her. He'd flown up the night before. She needed the drive. 6 hours of highway. The landscape going from rural to suburban to urban. The same route she'd driven in the other direction 8 months ago with a property deed and a cashier's check and no idea what she was walking toward. She thought about Dorothea the whole drive, about what it must have felt like to be 30 years old with a company built from your own brain and watch it signed away under a name that wasn't yours, to know that the world would not help you, to refuse to be destroyed by either of those facts, to go into the basement and get to work. She thought about Eleanor, coming to Greyfall in 2019, reading the journals in that amber light, understanding at last, I can't do what needs to be done, but she can. She arrived in Boston at 7 in the morning, had coffee at a place on Newbury Street where the tables were small and the light was good and nobody knew her name, watched the city start its day, people with briefcases, people with strollers, a dog pulling its owner toward a bakery with the absolute conviction of someone who has identified their priorities. Ordinary morning, ordinary city. For about 3 more hours. The shareholder meeting started at 10. Sylvie arrived at 9:45. She stood across the street from the Boylston Street Tower and looked up at it for a moment. 55 floors of glass and steel. Felix's name wasn't on the exterior, but it was on the conference rooms and the branded materials and the annual report cover and every press release that had gone out in the last 8 months. Rain Infrastructure, his story, his company, built on Dorothea's work. She walked in. The lobby security guard checked her ID, saw the name Rain, looked up at her, made a call to someone, made another call, then after a pause that lasted about 45 seconds, handed back her ID and said the 61st floor meeting room was expecting her. It was not expecting her, but the guard had made a decision, and that decision would probably be the best one he made all year. She took the elevator up. Magnus was in the hallway. Briefcase, conservative suit, the face of a man who had already spent the morning in the ring and was fully warmed up. Ready? He asked. Since November 1934, she said. He almost smiled. The 61st floor conference room was full. 18 board members, 6 external shareholders, 2 lawyers Sylvie didn't know, a presentation screen showing a revenue chart with an aggressively optimistic upward trajectory, and Felix. Felix at the head of the table, bespoke suit, hair immaculate, the presentation clicker in his right hand, mid-sentence when the door opened, mid-word actually, something about projected infrastructure contracts in the Carolinas and the Pacific Northwest. The room went silent, the way rooms go silent when something has entered that fundamentally changes the nature of what was happening before. Felix went still. His eyes found Sylvie immediately, across the length of the table, past 18 board members and 6 shareholders, and everything he had built and planned and leveraged and maneuvered for the last 8 months. What, he said, not a question, a very controlled, very quiet statement of surprise from a man who had thought he had eliminated all the variables. Good morning, Sylvie said, and she walked to the table. Magnus placed the first document in front of the nearest board member, then the next, then the next. moving down the table with the systematic efficiency of a man serving papers he had been holding for a very long time and was enjoying in a professional and understated way, delivering debt acquisition notice, Ironstone Capital, 67% of outstanding Rain infrastructure corporate debt, confirmed and registered as of the previous Friday. Patent injunction notice, filed that morning. 4 original patent certificates in the name of Dorothea Elspeth Rain, authenticated, dated. The forged transfer documents identified with forensic paper dating, confirming they post-dated the originals by a minimum of 6 years, and the calculation, 90 years of unpaid licensing fees, calculated using standard IP law, applied to the revenue figures in Rain Infrastructure's own annual filings. Magnus had done the math 4 times. The 5th time he'd had a separate firm verify it. The number at the bottom of the calculation was very large, larger in fact than Rain Infrastructure's current market capitalization, which meant the company was as of this morning technically insolvent. The board members were reading, quietly, carefully, with the focused attention of people who have just realized they have been sitting at a table that was not what they thought it was. Felix hadn't moved. He was looking at Sylvie across the table, and she was looking back. "You can't," he started. "The patents are original," she said. "The documentation is complete. The forensic analysis of the transfer documents will be entered into the federal filing this afternoon." A pause. "There's one more thing." She reached into her jacket and placed a small wireless speaker on the table. "This is a recording," she said, "made by Dorothea Elspeth Rain on the 14th of November, 1934, in the basement workshop of Ironstone Granary Citadel, on a Marconi steel wire recorder. The wire has been authenticated by 2 independent archival laboratories in the last 72 hours. She pressed play. Dorothea's voice filled the conference room, clear, precise, 90 years old and completely present. "This is Dorothea Elspeth Rain. It is the 14th of November, 1934. The room went completely still. Nobody reached for their phone. Nobody leaned over to their lawyer. Nobody did anything except what humans do when they hear something that reaches past the professional and the procedural and the performative and lands somewhere more fundamental. They listened. Dorothea's voice moved through the room, through the glass walls and the expensive furniture and the revenue charts on the screen, through everything Felix had built, through the clean architecture of a company whose story had always been missing its first chapter. She spoke for 4 minutes. When she finished, the silence was different from before. It was the silence of something having been settled. Felix was gripping the clicker. His knuckles had gone white. His face was doing something complicated, something that involved the architecture of a man who had believed himself to be the only one with full information and had just discovered he was not. "She built this," Sylvie said quietly, "not for the room, not for the lawyers or the board members or the cameras that were technically not supposed to be in the room, but were because someone had made a decision. For Felix. Your grandfather stole it from her, and you've been running it ever since, not knowing, or knowing and not asking." A pause. "It doesn't matter which, because the building is still standing, and the patents are still here, and her voice is right there in this room." Felix opened his mouth, then closed it, because there was nothing. There was simply nothing to say that would address any part of what had just been placed on that table. Magnus stepped forward. "The board will need to vote on the immediate restructuring," he said. "To the room, professionally. the voice of someone closing an argument rather than opening one. The patent infringement settlement and the debt restructuring are both non-negotiable at this stage. What the board controls is the question of executive leadership going forward. The board voted in 11 minutes. Sylvie counted. 11 minutes, which was, given the circumstances, actually quite fast. But boards are efficient at removing people when the alternative is going down with them. That's not cynicism. That's just how rooms full of people protecting their own interests operate when the interests have suddenly become very clear. Felix was removed from his position as chairman and CEO. All shares reverted to the estate under the settlement terms. He sat at the head of the table for the vote. He sat there after the vote. I didn't stand up immediately, just sat there, looking at the table, looking at the patents, looking at the speaker that had carried his great-grandmother's voice into a room that bore her family's name, but not her own. Sylvie walked to the head of the table. She placed an envelope in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" "Open it." He did. Inside, a lease agreement for a one-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Functional, clean, anonymous, not ugly, just utterly without history, without weight, without the significance that comes from being part of something larger than itself. And a cashier's check. $10,000. He stared at it. She waited, because she wanted to see the moment when he understood, when he remembered what he had put in a different envelope and handed to a different person 8 months ago in this same building. You always had a thing for old buildings. Now you have one. She watched it land. He looked up at her. "You always preferred modern," she said quietly. "Clean lines, nothing with history, nothing that needs maintaining." A pause. "Now you have one." She turned, walked to the door, stopped, looked back once. "Her name was Dorothea," she said. "It's going on the building, and on the research center, and on the letterhead of this company, starting with the next reporting quarter." A pause. "It should have been there from the beginning." She walked out. Spring came to Greyfall fully in May. The valley turned green in the particular all-at-once way of northern places that have been holding their breath through a long winter and finally exhale. The river ran fast and loud with snow melt from the hills. The old-growth trees above the citadel put out their first leaves, pale green and translucent in the morning light. Dean brought in a crew from a historical restoration firm in Albany, professionals who had taken one look at the building and gone quiet in the way professionals go quiet when they encounter something operating above their standard expectations. The upper floors reinforced, the Gothic windows cleaned and re-leaded, the crenellated parapet repointed, the interior plasterwork redone in a lime mix matched to the original recipe Dorothea had specified in her technical notes, which turned out to be extraordinarily durable and slightly different from every standard formulation currently available, because of course it was. Of course, Dorothea Rain had improved the formula, and on the morning of the 15th of May, they turned on the water wheel. It had taken 6 weeks to complete, 7 new paddles in old-growth white oak, the iron frame descaled and treated, the drive shaft relined with bronze bushings, the gear coupling rebuilt from Dorothea's original specifications, which were still on the wall of the room beneath the main floor in perfect clarity. 6 in the morning, the river in full spring flow, Dean outside on the cliff ledge, his hand on the engagement lever they'd fabricated from the original linkage, drawing. He looked up at her. She nodded. He threw the lever. The water wheel, 38 feet of iron and new oak, tilted 20 degrees against the cliff face of a black granite building above a rushing river, turned. Slowly at first, the river's force building against the resistance of 80 years of stillness, then faster, the paddles catching the current and giving it purpose, the gear train engaging with a deep mechanical rumble that moved through the walls and the floor, and Sylvie's feet and her hands on the stone sill. The lights in the basement came on. She knew they would, but she'd asked Dean not to tell her which moment the circuit would engage. She'd wanted to feel it, the amber glow of the caged industrial bulbs rising from below, coming up through the trapdoor hatch she'd left propped open, filling the main floor with the warm light that Dorothea had designed into this building 90 years ago. Still working, Sylvie stood at the window. River sound, wheel sound, the deep mechanical voice of a building that had been sleeping and was waking, the light from below. She thought about Dorothea coming here every day, in 1926, in 1929, in 1931, when everything was being taken, in 1934, when she put the last pieces in place and sealed the door behind her and trusted not in any specific person, but in the persistence of truth itself. She thought about Elias building this in 1887, quarrying the granite from the same cliff it stood on, building something that said, "I intend to be here long after the reason for building me has been forgotten." She thought about Eleanor, coming quietly in 2019, sitting at Dorothea's table, reading, understanding, making the plan. She thought about herself, 21 years old, in October, sleeping in a rental car with an emergency blanket, eating canned beans and ranking them by quality, crying in the bathroom of a gas station in Millhaven and not telling anyone about it, getting up the next morning and going back, getting up the next morning and going back. That was the whole thing, actually. That was the lesson Dorothea had carved into the walls and pressed into steel wire and sealed into a Mosler safe and entrusted to a building above a river. Not that truth was easy, not that justice was fast, not that the people who take things always face consequences. Just that. Get up the next morning, go back. The plaque was Dean's idea. Dark granite, matching the building, set into the wall beside the main entrance at eye level in a clean serif font that Sylvie had specified and he had agreed with immediately. 2 lines, commissioned by Elias Rain, 1887, reclaimed by Sylvie Rain, 2024. Inside above the entrance to the east wing, a second plaque, also granite, the Dorothea Rain Center for Civil Engineering, in recognition of work done here, 1926 to 1934, and of patients kept here, 1934 to 2024. Lorna was already there when Sylvie came inside that June morning, standing in the center of the main floor with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who has watched something she spent 22 years protecting finally become what it was always supposed to be. She handed Sylvie the second cup without a word. They stood together in the light, the grinding wheels above them, the Gothic windows, the vaulted ceiling with its precise stone arches, the water wheel turning outside, the river running below. "What are you going to do with it?" Lorna asked. "The company." Sylvie thought about Dorothea's hydraulic system, the pressure attenuation design, the way it accommodated force instead of resisting it, the elegance of redirecting instead of blocking. "Run it properly," she said. "Start the engineering center. There are about 15 states that need updated flood control infrastructure and have been putting it off for a decade. Dorothea's original system was decades ahead of what's currently standard. She paused. I want to take her designs and build them, actually build them, not the original version, the updated version, what they would have become if she'd kept working. She would have approved. I hope so. She looked up at the ceiling. I keep thinking about her down in that room, running the calculations over and over. She wasn't building a company. She wasn't thinking about market share. She was thinking about rivers, about the people downstream from rivers, about what it means when the water rises and there's nothing in place to manage it. She looked at the far wall, at the outline where the shelving had been removed to reveal the carved equations beneath, still there. Fluid dynamics, pressure calculations, the mathematics of water at serious industrial scale. DR November 1931. She was thinking about useful, Sylvie said quietly, about whether the thing she was making would actually help someone, whether it would work, whether it would last. She turned back toward the light. That seems like enough, she said. That seems like exactly enough to build on. The water wheel turned. The river ran. The building, which had been built to last, and had done exactly that through a century of abandonment and bureaucratic erasure and one uncle's studied indifference, held them both in its granite arms, and outside the narrow Gothic windows, high above the rushing water, the valley was green and the light was clean, and the hills went on in all directions, exactly as they had when Elias quarried the first stone, when Dorothea lit the first lamp in the room below, when Eleanor sat at the draftsman's table and understood at last. And now too,